Gabe Rodriguez, go ahead and unmute and show me your video. And I have a couple of reports coming up here. Now, this is Business Leaders for Michigan, and they just came out with a report last week on how benchmarking Michigan's economic performance against the top 10 states and where Michigan was ranked. Did I get that right, Gabe?
Correct. Yes. Thank you, Mike.
All right. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? So I read the report, but I'm going to let you give me the facts for the audience. I was, I don't know, encouraged, I guess, but still, we're in the middle of the pack, right?
Yeah, I think it's a good to be encouraged by it. We're ranked 29th in the nation in terms of the ranking, but that's a big improvement because anyone who was here 10 years ago, 12 years ago, in 2009, 2010, we were ranked 49th. So really, it's a strong improvement to go from 49th to 29th, but it just shows we still have a ways to go. You know, we have a lot of economic disruptions after beyond the pandemic. You have the shift to vehicle electrification and what that means for our economy. And I think that this just shows us that we're not yet where we want to be a top 10 state. And we have a few headwinds ahead of us, but we are marching on to and pointing a few things we can do to move forward.
All right, let's break down the numbers a bit more if we could.
I'm happy to. So what happened is this is actually a new metric. So Business Leaders for Michigan has been looking at becoming a top 10 state for the last 10 years. And traditionally, we were looking at a lot of output metrics, things like GDP, income, total population. This year, we added a few inputs to kind of tell us if we're going in the right direction. So we added educational attainment, business creation, so all the startups and new business activity, net migration instead of population, because I tell people it's important that we have the 10th largest population, but it matters more if we see people coming in or going out. So we kind of changed that metric a little bit. And also we added in poverty because we didn't want to just look at income and GDP, looking at the total population. We wanted to look at how all different Michiganders are living throughout this times, and we wanted to add poverty to the list as well.
Okay. So what are we doing well then when you look at vis-a-vis the other states? Are we doing some areas that are good?
So yeah, we've had a large growth because our rankings actually take into account two things, Mike. One is where do we currently stand? It's important to know where you stand along the metrics, but we also look at 3-year growth, kind of where the puck is going, if that makes sense. Because if you're looking good, but the puck's going in the wrong direction, that's important to know. And what we look at now is our current ranks. We have a lot in kind of the 30s. So things have moved up since we were in the 40s. But really what I look at is what is our 3-year growth rank? And we have some good data in terms of net talent migration. So 12 years ago, or at this stat, 11 years ago, we were 49th in net migration. The only state that more people were leaving was Alaska, if you believe me. We were losing 40,000 people every 3 years. Now we're gaining 30,000 people every 3 years. And now we moved up to 19th. So that's a big change, Mike. And that shows the improvements that we've been making here in Michigan. Another thing that I think is positive, our poverty rate has decreased. We were in the 40s there. Now we're at 34th, and we're 8th in terms, so top 10 in terms of our 3-year change of poverty decreasing. We're the 8th best in terms of the amount we've decreased. And the other thing, we're growing faster than a lot of states is educational attainment. Although we're still in the 30s, we're growing at the 20th rate. So we're growing better than 30 other states. That's kind of, I'd say, the rosy picture on things we're doing well.
Yeah, I don't know whether we're still having the brain drain. We got great universities here, and what was happening for a very long time was the folks would graduate and then you go to Chicago, go to New York, go to wherever, but they weren't staying in Michigan. Is that changed at all? Have you been able to measure that?
Yeah, so the data we uses American Census data. It's the ACS survey. And what it looks at is individuals who have a high school degree or more and whether they're moving or coming out of the state. So we look at all of that. And you can see we were 49th in terms of the brain drain of any state, and now we're 19th.
Right.
And when you're looking at individual universities, they have specific data that they track as well. And we've seen positive trends from 2009 to now. I don't have the exact data, but it does track consistent what we're seeing on a global basis.
Now, one of the factors that's probably not in here, but it certainly is obvious, the changes the pandemic has wrought. We cover a lot of folks, a lot of businesses, and it's been actually an opportunity for some businesses because the H-1Bs, they weren't able to bring in anybody from overseas, or very few people, and now because of the fact that we're all working virtually, or most of us anyway, that I've heard the big corporations say it's actually not a bad deal because they can work with people around the world, just have the time change, of course, to deal with. Is there any way of measuring what sort of impact that's having on our corporations here?
Well, we haven't seen that specific, Mike, but what we have seen is the struggle to find people total. So that's in Michigan and across the US. And one thing is that is on the negative side of the new data is our labor force participation rate. We track that. We went down 3% in the pandemic. Top 10 states only decreased 1.3%. So it's one of these that we have been hit harder in terms of the lack of available people in the labor force than other states that have done better than us historically in other metrics in terms of GDP, median household income, education rate. So something we really need to improve is getting more people into the labor force, whether it be abroad or really in our own state as well.
What are the opportunities we have for, say, leapfrogging other states and improving our numbers overall? What do you see as those opportunities?
Well, I think we have a great opportunity right now with the American Rescue Plan Act funding, also known as ARPA. So the state has only used 20% of its ARPA funds. We did an analysis and looked at other top 10 states have used 60%. So Michigan has been kind of holding their money back from the federal government. And that is a good thing for now. We just need to make sure we spend it on the right stuff. And we need to spend it on things like increasing degrees and credentials, removing barriers to work, to drive more labor force participation, investments in things like childcare, broadband access, affordable housing. We need to improve our education systems. We need to improve a K through 12 system because we're not going to get people to get degrees or get certificates if they don't have a strong K through 12 background. And also something that gives me a little bit of promise for the future is the bipartisan economic development package that passed before last year, which used some ARPA funding, but really used a lot of the general fund surplus, which is how do we attract more businesses to come here and to grow here? We need to focus on site development, customer service, providing the right incentives, as well as talent. Talent is what we hear from businesses as to why they need to move here.
Any other points that you see as a way for us to perhaps leapfrog some of these other states?
I think other areas we can do is focus on how do we use some of this funding for entrepreneurship, innovation, scale of activities? Something I know it's very important to you, Mike, is kind of what's happening in the tech space. This is something that if we can invest some of these funds in entrepreneurship, innovation, that'd be great, as well as I mentioned, workforce training programs. We really need to fill these talent gaps for businesses to support new jobs, sites, provide pathways for this career progression. A good example is what Indianapolis did. In Indiana has spent $500 million of this federal money into regional economic development grants. They parceled it out, 50 million per region that bid. And that 500 million was partnered with 15 billion of local and private money in order to put into different things that was important to the region, whether it was expanding an air base, whether it was adding an entrepreneurial facility, whether it was changing sites and adding water or broadband. Each community could decide what they wanted to do and basically ask for funding from the state, but they had to bring in funding from the private sector and from locals. So that's another way to think about how to use this money transformationally, leapfrog other states versus just incrementally. We've seen some states give cash to individuals, and we don't see that right now as being a really transformational impact it may warm, it may warm the economy for a little bit, but right now we have a pretty hot economy with a lot of inflation.
I assume that you've sent these recommendations of yours up to the governor, or at least to the administration, about what things that could be done or not. Have you done that?
Yeah, we're working alongside the administration and the legislative leaders to kind of talk with them about what can be done to kind of leapfrog the next these other states. And really what we're showing them is this is what other states are doing. And this is what we can do. and really showing that impact. Other states are spending a lot of this on direct payments. And yeah, that is one way to do this, but that won't leapfrog jump. We're saying how much other states are using for infrastructure. That's a big thing. Water, broadband, other states are using a lot of these funds for infrastructure. So we're trying to use a benchmarking model to see what we can do to improve the state.
And also, getting back to one of your earlier points, Business Leaders for Michigan, you represent very large companies, the CEOs therein, and of course, they're experiencing all these labor issues and whatnot. And you were mentioning that in Indiana, they took some federal money and leveraged it with private funds. Is that something you guys are taking a look at right now, too?
Yeah, it's something that we're definitely talking to legislators and the administration on these sorts of issues in terms of how can we leverage this funds to tie to more local needs and regional needs. Because there's one approach, which is have the state say you spend X million on infrastructure, X million on economic development, X million workforce development, X million on placemaking, or you provide a fund and say, you tell us what you need to spend, regions. And then the regions also have a lot of this federal funding as well. So the regions got another $4 billion or so from the federal government, just counties, cities, municipalities. So they have a lot of funds as well that they can use to kind of leapfrog. I think it's something, Mike, we get thought about, hey, where's Michigan and do a top 10 state? I say this is a regional battle. We need Detroit to be better than Atlanta. We need all of our peer regions, Lansing to be better than Columbus or Madison. How can we make this less of a state and focus on what the regions need to do to really grow and improve?
So let's end this kind of on an optimistic note. I'm going back to the very beginning, in the sense of questions I was asking you was, we went from 49th to 29th. Great progress. Where do you see this going, say, over the next couple of years? I'm asking you to look into your crystal ball. If we do all these things you've just described, do you think that'll get us into the top 10 soon or not?
I think this is a journey, Mike, and this is something that will take some time. What we've seen is Tennessee moved from 34th to 16th in the last 5 years. And this is the same state that just beat us for the Ford deal. Had been investing in education and universal free college tuition programs. So I would say that's a good benchmark. So if you do all the right investments and you put the money in, you can move. They moved 18 spots in 5 years. So that's a big goal. That's one of the largest movers you see. But that's something that we see. It takes time, it takes investment, but it's something we have to start doing now. And as you mentioned, we did improve from 49th to 29th. And we just showed that we can work in a bipartisan manner to get economic development package that just got done last year. This ARPA funding and this general fund surplus can really be used to help push us into the right direction.
Okay. And if folks want to reach out to Business Leaders for Michigan, how do they do that?
Well, they can reach out to me directly at gabe@businessleadersformichigan.com. It's easy, GABE at businessleadersformichigan.com. And I'm happy to direct them to the right person who can help answer the question.